Welcome to the Mindset Game podcast. I am absolutely delighted to have Dr. James Gordon here with us today. Jim is a Harvard-educated psychiatrist, as well as the founder and CEO of the nonprofit, the Center for Mind-Body Medicine in Washington, D.C. He is the author of the book Transforming Trauma, The Path to Hope and Healing, and is internationally recognized for using self-awareness, self-care, and group support to heal population-wide psychological trauma. He is a clinical professor at Georgetown Medical School and was chairman under Presidents Clinton and G.W. Bush of the White House Commission on Complementary and Alternative Medicine Policy. Jim, it is truly an honor to have you here with us on the show. Thank you.
Well, it's great to be here with you too, Farad.
So how about we start with what is mind-body medicine?
Well, mind-body medicine has two major meanings. One is it's a description of the complete interpenetration of mind and body. That is, it is a recognition of the scientific reality that every thought and feeling we have, how we relate to other people, what we're anticipating and what we're remembering, that all of those aspects of our mental and emotional functioning have an effect on every organ and every cell in our body, and vice versa. What's going on in the organs and cells in our bodies affect how we think and feel. So that's the first. That is an emphasis. It's an updated version of psychosomatic, if you will. Those are Greek words. These are kind of Anglo-Saxon words. So from psychosomatic medicine to mind-body medicine. This is a reality. The second meaning of the word or mind, the hyphenated mind-body medicine. Hearing a siren outside right now. I don't know if our viewers can hear it. It's just I just got back from Ukraine, and it reminds me of the air raids in Ukraine. But I'm in Washington, D.C., and there's no air raid happening. Bad feelings in the capital, but no air raid happening.
Wow, it's interesting that you noticed that even as it was happening, maybe even more so because you just came back from the Ukraine, and so more, you're more conscious of that. Wow.
That is for sure. Second meaning of mind-body medicine is the growing understanding that we can enter this continual conversation among all the organs and all the faculties and all the cells in our body, that we can use simple techniques of self-awareness and self-care to have a positive influence on this conversation. For example, to breathe deeply and lower blood pressure, to move our bodies and to improve our mood and release mood-improving neurotransmitters in our brain. So mind-body medicine is saying that this reality of the complete interconnection of mind and body, that each of us has the capacity to use our skills, our talents, our intellect, our imagination to enter that conversation and to change how we feel, how we look at the world, how our bodies are functioning, and how our mind is functioning, and whether or not we can open ourselves more easily to new experiences and other people. We have that capacity, and everyone has that capacity to use the mind-body connection to benefit themselves.
And what is interesting for me as I hear you share this is that, yes, everybody has the capacity to do that, and yet most people don't do that. It might be in large part because they don't know how, and that's what you and your team are wonderfully doing in our world to teach them that. And I think that there's also like a little bit of a fear around, us trying to heal ourselves or to self-soothe ourselves, that we might not be doing it right. Or, there's this need of, many of us will go to a doctor, right? And it's not instead, but a lot of us kind of take all of the ownership of our health to our caregivers. And so how do you see that playing out?
Well, you said it very beautifully, that we live in a society, particularly here in the United States, but not just in the United States, where we think somebody else has the answers. It's some expert, some algorithm that's going to tell us what's wrong with us and what we need to do. And of course, there are times when you need that. you have an overwhelming infection. You need somebody to see what kind of bacteria you have and to prescribe the appropriate antibiotics. But for most of the issues that most of us are facing in our lives, whether it's anxiety or depression, hypertension, type 2 diabetes, pain syndromes, difficulty sleeping, there's no magic bullet. That all of the medical answers have significant side effects that accompany them. Now, the problem is that we have been taught right from the beginning, from earliest days, that somebody else has the answer, that some expert, some psychologist, some doctor has the answer to what's wrong with us. Now, sometimes, of course, that's true. I mean, I'm a psychiatrist and I have some answers, but most of what I've learned over the last close to 60 years of working with people who are having difficult times is that so often they have the answers within themselves, but it's like they've been tricked out of it is not quite fair, but educated out of their own capacity to help themselves. That this capacity that's there in people with less education, in societies that don't have all the resources that we do, that capacity is still there. And so, for example, with many of the indigenous people with whom I've worked over the years, that something is going wrong, your granny has the answers. If it's a relatively minor thing, not life-threatening, not a psychosis, not a suicidal feelings, but basic unhappiness, basic physical problems, and that she will teach you what to do. She will help you figure out what you should use in the local pharmacopoeia, what kinds of rituals you should do, what kinds of practices, and then you do them. So you come to her as a teacher. We don't have that by and large in our society. And we don't educate our children, for the most part. The health education courses in most schools are not terribly helpful. There's a lot of, or at least they are only in certain domains. A lot of talk about concern about suicide and how you recognize the signs of suicidality, warnings against drugs and alcohol and tobacco, but not really teaching kids how to understand and take care of themselves. That's not part of our education. We're educated mostly cognitively. There's not so much experiential education. And the health courses focus mostly on objective facts that we can learn out there and information we can communicate, but they don't focus on what's most basic. What's going on inside you emotionally, physically, and what can you do about it? So, this is a profound shift that the work that I do, the work that other people have been doing, focusing on a lot, especially the last 40 or 50 years, is making that shift and understanding that the true primary care is self-care. We talk about primary care physicians, internists, family medicine docs, pediatricians, general practitioners. That's great. They're great. But the true primary care is what we can do for ourselves. And that's what my focus is. That's what my focus has been as a researcher at the National Institute of Mental Health, chairing this White House commission, chairing an advisory committee to National Institutes of Health, is putting that self-care and mutual support, the support of other people, at the center of all healthcare, where it belongs.
I agree. It is so important. I remember one of the things that I learned is, I think it was in the Journal of the American Medical Association, that 60 to 80% of primary care physician visits are stress related. Some, I imagine physicians would even say more than that, and more than 60 to 80%. And what's interesting is, as we teach this to kids, early on, or also to the caregivers of the children, right? How do you self-soothe? I imagine that also prevents potential trauma from being encoded. So tell us a little bit more about trauma. I know that you have this wonderful book, Transforming Trauma, The Path to Hope and Healing. What is trauma, and what does trauma have to do with the mind-body healing process?
Well, thank you for the question. Trauma is a Greek word. It means injury or wound to the body, to the mind, to the spirit. And given what I said about mind-body medicine earlier, and given the reality of how we function as organisms, trauma that comes to the mind, to the body, to the spirit affects all aspects of our lives. Any of us who's had I'm thinking back to the trauma of my breakup with my girlfriend when I was in medical school, and how distressing that was to me in so many ways, disturbing my sleep, disturbing at times my powers of concentration, really making me feel not good physically as well as disturbing me emotionally. Trauma comes to everyone. I begin the book, Transforming Trauma, by saying there are two common misconceptions about trauma. One is that it only happens to those other people, the ones who are there in war zones, or the ones who've been horribly abused and neglected as children, not to most people. Well, that's just not true. This trauma is part of our lives. If it doesn't happen early on because we're born into a family that's impoverished, or where there's violence, or just a dysfunction in the family, or because we might have a congenital illness of some kind, those are early life traumas. Later on, there are the traumas of loss of a relationship, of rejection, of significant disappointment, and our hopes for ourselves. Those traumas of late adolescence, early adulthood, those are very real. And if we, as we live longer and we move into middle age, many marriages, over half of marriages here in the United States and many so-called developed countries, end in divorce. I have rarely seen a divorce that was not traumatic. It happens. I don't know what, how sort of what the people who appear in Us Weekly, they always, oh no, we had an amicable divorce. Well, I know some of those people. It's not entirely true, but divorce is very difficult. Even if it's relatively amicable, you have to deal with, oh my God, I invested so much in this person, and then there are the children, all these things. And as we get to middle age, illnesses tend to become more manifest. Our parents, our grandparents are likely already to have died. Our parents are getting old, they may be dying. And then if we're lucky enough to live longer, the frailty that comes, the limitations that come with old age, the loss of loved ones, which is inevitable, and of course our own death, all of these are traumatic events. So trauma is a part of life. Indigenous people all over the world understand this, and it gives them a more, not only, so people will say, well, they're more stoical. Well, maybe they're more stoical, and that may be true, but they're also appreciate the wholeness of life, and that life does include trauma. We are beginning, and I hope that my book, Transforming Trauma, contributes to that. We're beginning to understand that trauma is a part of our lives. And I would hope that the pandemic, and again, I don't know about you, but I haven't run across anybody who wasn't affected, in some sense, traumatized. I mean, they may not have lost somebody, although, over 1 million Americans died during the pandemic. So their families lost somebody. My brother died. So that's traumatizing. But the pandemic itself, in the limitations and the fears that we had, and the sense of the lack of stability in our world and the lack of predictability, that was traumatic. That's a part of life. The second myth about trauma, or misconception, is that if you have been traumatized, it's going to last forever and you can't make a change, and you better be on medication or see a therapist for the rest of your life. In fact, that's not true either. I've worked with people very severely traumatized, including people who've been in some of the most brutal, I can't call them child rearing situations, but in some of the most brutal situations, living situations with parents or caregivers, supposed caregivers, who abuse them horribly, who have been traumatized, been limited, suffered greatly, but who have used, in this instance, used my approach, this approach from Transforming Trauma, to become remarkable human beings. And it's not just my approach, but there are other approaches that we're creating, that many people are creating, because we're recognizing that people do have the capacity not only to recover from trauma, but to move through it and to actually become, not only, as Nietzsche said, a little stronger. Whatever doesn't kill me makes me stronger. Not only to become stronger, but to become more flexible, more accepting, wiser, more compassionate. And again, Indigenous people have always known this, and they selected people who came through their traumatic experiences of childhood and early adulthood in many cultures to be the healers of the next generation. We're now coming to a modern scientific understanding that there is this thing called post-traumatic growth. And there are a bunch of studies, some of which I quote in Transforming Trauma, that show that people who have been severely traumatized can not only recover, not only function normally again, but that they become, and I'll use the phrase, better people. And one of the first studies that was done, and I find this very interesting, was done by an Air Force psychiatrist. And it was done it was only men, the men who were imprisoned in the Hanoi Hilton. That is the flyers, the pilots, the navigators, the gunners who were shot down over North Vietnam and captured by the North Vietnamese and imprisoned in extraordinarily harsh conditions for 1, 2, 5, 7, 8 years. They were tortured physically, they were tortured psychologically, they were kept as much as possible from contact with their families or even from other prisoners. Yet when those guys were interviewed after they got out of the prison, they said, yes, it was horrible, but I'm a better person. And not only do I think I'm a better person, but my wife thinks I'm a better person. John McCain, the former late Senator John McCain, it was one of those people who was in prison and who was interviewed. And he was, by all accounts, a totally self-centered playboy, flyboy before he was shot down. And afterwards, I mean, he was still a very genial guy who loved the party, but he'd become a much better person. And everyone who knew him said, yeah, he before he really only cared about himself. Now he cares about his community. He cares about, and some of the people watching us may remember that he was the chief architect of America's policy against torture and really resisted not only torture for other countries, but the torture that our own country was doing. And he was a great opponent of it and very principled in many, many ways. So I think this is the possibility, so that when we have, and I've experienced this myself, and many of the people who are on our Center for Mind-Body Medicine faculty have also experienced the same thing, that as they've gone through and learned how to deal with the trauma, accepted it, learned to use the kinds of techniques that I teach in Transforming Trauma, as they've reached out to other people, they have become more compassionate, more thoughtful, more intuitive. They've had more of a sense of meaning and purpose in their lives. So that's the promise of trauma. I'm not trying to minimize the great pain. There's tremendous pain in losing somebody you loved, or in Ukraine, I see people every day when I'm there who are bombed out of their homes, and their villages or their cities are destroyed, and maybe family members are dead and other family members are fighting. And yet the possibility is there for moving to another state of being. And I can see it. I can see it in many of those people, that they're taking care of each other, that they're very open to the techniques that we teach, that they're very interested in making positive contributions to their society. While I'm thinking of it, people who are interested in the work that we do and interested in these points about trauma might want to look at the Center for Mind-Body Medicine website, cmbm.org. And if they go to the page that's about our work in the Middle East, and particularly, I think it's on the page on our work in Gaza, there's a segment from CBS 60 Minutes that shows a little girl, that features a little girl who lost her father, 2 uncles, and her aunt. They were all killed in the 2014 war. And this little girl who came through our program of self-awareness and self-care and group support, you can see, and I don't want to spoil it anymore, but you can see the profound change and how she came from the first session from wanting to die. And this is 6 months after the war is over, which parenthetically suggests that the sooner we deal with trauma, the better, because it's going to stick around if we don't deal with it. 6 months after the war was over, the only answer she saw for the pain she was feeling was to die and be buried with her beloved father. She came through 9 groups of learning techniques of self-awareness and self-care. She transformed the trauma and came up with a way of being that is just extraordinarily inspiring. I won't say more about it. People can look. It's only a 6-minute segment on our website. Take a look at it.
Yeah.
But that's possible for all of us. This little girl is an inspiration for me and for countless people who've seen the video.
Absolutely. And I know that you mentioned that also in your wonderful TED Talk that I invite people to check out as well. So, Jim, some people listening now might be reflecting on some of their own traumas, their own losses, maybe unexpected events that they've experienced in their life. And they're curious about, how do I transform trauma? And I invite them all, of course, to, reach into your book and explore that. And of course, your programs. If you can share with us a little bit of guidance as to what some of those self-care, self-awareness practices are, maybe even guide us through one of them today, just as a starting point to begin the healing process.
I'd be very happy to. The first thing is to have this kind of discussion that we're having and to hear somebody who presumably knows what they're talking about, who's both been through it himself, but also has worked with a lot of people, say there is hope. That's really important. And then this is right from the beginning. And that's why at the beginning of Transforming Trauma, I tell some stories about terribly traumatized people who have moved through and beyond the trauma. So to everybody who's watching us, there is hope. That's number one. Number two, there are programs, including the ones that we have. There are programs of self-awareness and self-care that can provide the pathway. It can be the path to hope and healing. Starting there. Number three, that if we can come into physiological and psychological balance, that gives us a leg up on transforming trauma. And so that I begin in the work that we do in training. We've now trained close to 8,000 people around the world to use the model with others that I describe in Transforming Trauma. We begin with techniques that bring us into physiological and psychological balance that have been demonstrated scientifically to do that. And then once we're in that kind of balance, everything else becomes easier. Everything else becomes much more accessible, whether it's using self-care techniques or being in therapy with a therapist who's helping you move through the situation or being in a support group. The very first technique that we teach is technically called, it's a concentrative meditation. That's sort of a fancy phrase for slow, deep breathing with our bellies soft and relaxed. And I'll do that with you and with those who are watching us just for a couple of minutes, and I'll just talk a little bit about the physiology as I do that. But the idea here is, if you feel comfortable, you closed your eyes, and that's a very good thing, because in a concentrated meditation, you're doing your best to eliminate external stimulation so you can concentrate. It could be concentrating on a sound or an image. In this case, it's concentrating on our breath. So as we sit comfortably, and I encourage everybody to sit comfortably, make sure this is not meant to be an ordeal. This is meant to be an invitation to a relaxation. So sit comfortably and allow your breathing deepen. And as your breathing deepens, more air goes to the bottom of our lungs, so more oxygen can diffuse into our bloodstream, because there's better oxygen exchange at the bottom of our lungs. And if we're breathing slowly and deeply, more air is going to the bottom of our lungs. And oxygen, as probably you all remember, feeds every cell in our bodies. And as we breathe slowly and deeply, let's concentrate on the breath coming in through our nose and out through our mouth. It's a very relaxing way to breathe that may be a little unfamiliar. And concentrate on the belly being soft and relaxed. This is the way babies breathe. Bellies going up and down with breathing. And also the third part of the concentration is concentrate on the word soft, reminding us to let our bellies be soft, concentrating on the word soft as we breathe in, and belly as we breathe out. And as we do this, breathing slowly and deeply in through the nose and out through the mouth with the belly soft and relaxed, we're activating our vagus nerve, that's V-A-G-U-S. And the vagus nerve is the central part of our parasympathetic nervous system. It promotes relaxation. So when we breathe slowly and deeply in through the nose and out through the mouth, with our bellies soft and relaxed, we're lowering our blood pressure, slowing our heart rate, relaxing the big muscles in our bodies that are tensed when we're in fight or flight, when we're under stress, and we're improving our digestion. And as we continue to breathe this way, slowly and deeply in through the nose and out through the mouth with the belly soft and relaxed, we're quieting activity in a portion of the emotional brain called the amygdala, A-M-Y-G-D-A-L-A. Amygdala is a Greek word. It means almond, because this part of our brain is almond-shaped. And it's a center of fear and anger. And slow, deep, soft belly breathing, which activates the vagus nerve, quiets activity, quiets fear and anger and the amygdala. As we continue to breathe this way, we're stimulating activity in areas in the frontal part of our cerebral cortex that are responsible for thoughtful decision-making, self-awareness, compassion. So when we breathe slowly and deeply in through the nose and out through the mouth with our bellies soft and relaxed, we're quieting our bodies, calming the fear and anger that comes up when we've been traumatized, quieting the fear and anger in our brain, in our mind, and we're enhancing our capacity to think clearly and make good decisions and be self-aware and have compassion and empathy for other people. All this from slow, deep, soft belly breathing. And as we continue to breathe this way, just for maybe 30 seconds more, we can feel our whole body relax with each exhalation. Thoughts come, let them come, notice them, let them go. Gently bring your mind back to soft, to the breath, to this relaxation. This is the antidote to fight or flight, the antidote to stress. This brings us back into physiological and psychological balance. Just two more slow, deep, soft belly breaths. We can open our eyes. So how was that, Harriet?
Wow. Deeply relaxing and calming, just very calming, like soothing.
Great. And you did this. I think the very important point is that I feel different. I feel calmer. I feel more focused. I feel more relaxed, and also maybe in a quiet way, a little more energized too.
A little more
This is
playful.
possible. Even the first time, I'm sure you've done similar practices before, but even people who are doing this for the first time. I was working with people who were, been bombed out of their homes in Bakhmut and Mariupol, and 80% of the people in the room, I did it for a bit longer. I did it for 10 or 12 minutes with them. 80% of those people who'd been deeply traumatized felt a change, just the way we did. And what that says to them, as you can become, says the change that they often note is, as you did, feeling calmer, feeling soothed. That's possible. And at least as important is that you did this.
Mhm.
Nobody had, now people are spending thousands of dollars for devices to stimulate the vagus nerve to create calm and relieve anxiety and improve mood. All you need to do is breathe slowly and deeply for a period of time each day. And the science is showing us we can decrease anxiety, improve mood. And on top of that, we know that we're doing it.
Mhm.
And so we have the direct experience of making one change. And the way our brains work, we know at a deep level, if we can make one change, we have the capacity to make other changes. And that's the royal road. That is the path out of trauma, out of depression, out of anxiety. It's the path to hope and healing. And whether you've experienced a severe trauma or you're just going through a stressful time, you're learning that you can take control. You can make a difference for yourself. And I'm not saying people shouldn't go to a therapist. I'm a therapist. I see people in therapy, but the therapy will work so much better. And you will feel so much better if you're an active participant, if you're also doing things to take care of yourself when you're not sitting for that hour with the therapist. So this is foundational. And then we also teach another technique very early on, a movement technique, an expressive meditation. And you know this one, shaking and dancing. And people can look on our website and they can see demonstrations of these techniques. I demonstrate them. And of course, they can read about them in Transforming Trauma and read the whole script and read the research that we've done. But it's there. It's for everyone. Was that so? The moon belongs to everyone. The best things in life are free. It's there. Everybody can use it, and there's no extra charge.
And we need to know how to do it. And that's why I'm so grateful that you're teaching people the how. I think a lot of people these days recognize the impact that stress is having on their bodies, on their life, on relationships, and they don't quite know how, what to do in their busy lives that can have the best impact in the shortest amount of time, right? One of the wonderful guests that we've had on the podcast is a gentleman called Dr. Jeffrey Rediger, and he studies spontaneous remissions. And he talked about the fact that there is a resistance that is in the medical community for that. Almost like, in spite of the fact that there's loads of evidence that what you're suggesting is true, Jim, that people can have an effect on their own health and well-being in sometimes simple ways. And yet, a lot of people don't buy into that. Why is that?
Well, this is the mentality. There are many reasons, but it's the mentality that somebody else knows better, that there's a pill for every ill that you have. And also that's driven by, certainly in significant part, by the profit motive. You don't make much money off of self-care. I mean, you can buy my book, you can get the complete program. I think it costs 14 or 15 bucks, and I do get some royalties, or you can take it out from a library. But it's not, it's the incentives in our system are, all the economic incentives are on the side of getting fee-for-service care, paying expensively for diagnostic tests and procedures. And of course, sometimes those are absolutely necessary. One of the things that's been very interesting for me is we working with the largest division of the VA, Veterans Administration. This is a division in Sunshine Division, Florida, South Georgia, and the Caribbean. They serve 1.6 million vets. They're not concerned about the profit motive. They're concerned about the well-being of the vets. So this program, our complete program, the one I describe in Transforming Trauma, is permeating the whole system. And other parts of the VA are interested in our program and similar programs. So I think we have to look, if we want to care for people, we have to move into a model that's more of a public health and an educational model. We have to look at the relationship between physicians and other healthcare professionals and their patients as a true partnership. And we're here to teach, and in a sense, here to put ourselves out of business. So that requires a little courage on the part of healthcare practitioners and physicians in particular, with all the debts they have and everything else, is to bring this into their practice. But what I want to say is that what happens is people get most interested in this approach, even those who've resisted it, when they come up against situations that don't yield to conventional therapies. Most of the chronic illnesses, people come with cancer, with heart disease, with pain syndromes, with type 2 diabetes, difficulties with weight or eating or anxiety. When they've done everything they can conventionally and they're ready for something else. What is happening, and one of the reasons I've been working in this area now for 50 years, and one of the reasons that people are getting more interested now is because so many of their physicians are themselves so stressed out, so traumatized, and they are coming. I was just on a call earlier today with one of the, won't name, this is not the VA, another huge conglomerate of hospitals, 90,000 employees. And they're getting very interested because they want to save money on employee health. And doctors are getting interested because they're getting burnt out, and nurses are getting burnt out, and they want something for themselves. And that's but that's how I came to this work. I wanted something that would help me to help myself in a greater way than psychotherapy or psychoanalysis, as wonderful as those were. I was looking for, more peace, more understanding, maybe even, God help me, a little bit more wisdom. And so I began to look at some of these other traditions. There's been a growth over these last 50 years or so. More and more physicians and health professionals are recognizing this. More and more executives are recognizing this because they want their workforce to be happy and functional and productive. And they're not if they're stressed out, they're burnt out, they're angry. So I think that the opening is there now. And often the opening comes with traumatic events or with chronic stress or distress of some kind of crisis in an institution. Too many people are leaving. That's one of the crises that comes up in many of the large healthcare institutions, but also in other businesses. So that opens the door. So I'm hopeful that if people will pay attention to what's actually going on inside them, in the world in which they live, the world in which they are, leaders or executives, that it becomes that's something that seemed obscure, as you were suggesting in the beginning, because it's not sort of a fundamental part of our culture, becomes more obvious. And once you experience it, you say, oh, of course, I want that for myself, and I want that for everybody whom I care about.
Yeah, I truly believe that this is a movement that is happening here, in large part by you and your team and others like you that are giving people the hope that we can, in fact, we've got loads of research and evidence that we can, in fact, transform trauma, and giving empowerment, that path, right, through the book, through your programs, to be able to do that. So how can people learn more about, again, the center? I know you've already given the website. If you can please repeat that again, and specifically for corporate leaders that are listening, what specifically do you invite them to explore for themselves and their teams?
Great. Thank you. Yeah, the website cmbm.org, Charlie Mary, Betty Mary.org. And there's information about all of our programs. There are demonstrations of self-care techniques. There's a list of people whom we've certified in mind-body medicine. There are probably, well over 1,000 of those people here in the United States alone. So that's a great place to look. Get this book, Transforming Trauma, The Path to Hope and Healing. Read it. Take a look at it. Everything, all the techniques we use, there are probably 25 different self-care techniques together with the science. We've published now 24, 25 papers in refereed scientific journals about the effectiveness of the model that I describe in Transforming Trauma. If people are interested in working with the Center for Mind-Body Medicine, bringing our program to their institutions and or having people in the institutions trained, they can be in touch with me directly. It's J. Gordon, Gordon, J, the initial, Gordon at cmbm.org. And we'll figure it out. We are expanding our work significantly, and we'd love to work with institutions that are committed to this kind of change. So it's a pleasure for us. And I think one of the important things is that if you're curious, follow the lead of your curiosity. And also, my suggestion is try these techniques out for yourself. So, for example, one of the ways, and also one of the goals of our work and one of the goals of Transforming Trauma is to encourage people to trust their own intuition, to access their imagination. So I was just thinking at the end of today, one of the things I'm definitely going to do is I'm going to go out on my porch. I'm fortunate I have trees on my street here in DC. I'm going to look a little at the trees and the flowers. I'm going to do a little Tai Chi, and I'll have that connection with my body. I'll have that connection with the natural world. Just connecting with the natural world itself is therapeutic. If you spend 20 minutes or half an hour in nature, your stress hormones go down, your anxiety decreases, mood increases. So all of these things are possible, and they're pretty simple. They're pretty straightforward. Not always easy to take care of ourselves, but it becomes easier as we get in the habit of doing it.
Absolutely. And it starts with a decision to take ownership of how we feel, to care about how we feel. And then there's a whole world that is available for us as to how to do that.
Exactly. And once you start doing it for yourself, you will, in my experience, most people want to share it with others, share it with family members, share it with friends. If you're a leader in a business, you will likely want to share it with your employees as well. Oh, this is good for me. And one thing I want to say is one of the things that's most convincing to people is if somebody they respect has used this approach, or for that matter, used any approach, but I'm talking about the approach of Transforming Trauma, of self-awareness and self-care and mutual support. If you who are watching us, who are leaders, use this approach, and it makes a difference for you, when you speak to people in your corporation, people in your community, they'll hear you because it will be authentic. It's not a theory. This isn't, I read this guy, sounds like he's interesting, go check him out. Oh, that's okay. But if you've experienced it, people will really tune in and they will get very curious.
Absolutely. And then the movement grows and we change our planet. So thank you again. All my love to you. Thank you for the work that you're doing. And thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. And thank you for this lovely conversation. It's great to be with you.